Thank you so much for joining us. And my wife often says that the most precious thing that you can give someone is your time, and that you've given us your time here this evening. So thank you so much. If you're just joining us, please write in the chat where you're watching from. We have got people from literally all over the UK here this evening, so wherever you're watching, again, you are very, very welcome. We really want this to be a safe and supportive space. And so just to explain how the next hour is going to work is I've got some amazing panelists here who've got some incredible insights, but we also appreciate there are people watching where you are, that you'll have insights as well. So please feel free, as we're discussing, to write your insights in the chat. Things that you've learned about mental health in rural communities, things that you've realised that have been really effective in reaching out to your community. We want to learn from each other. There's not a them and us here, that we want to try and learn from each other as much as we can. But for tonight to work really efficiently and well, we really need you to write questions. We want to try and get through as many questions as possible. It's really a discussion between all of us so we can learn from each other to be more effective. I'm sure you're aware that it is Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and the theme is looking at anxiety, and this is a part of a number of events that I know are happening all over the country. And the context to this event was myself and Janet Nichols, who will be introducing herself shortly. We had a meeting a while ago looking at how we can be more effective at working together and to try and support people in their mental and emotional health. And I guess from my perspective, it was really trying to learn and trying to understand. I live in a rural community myself, and I want to understand it better. And me and Janet, in our discussion, we thought, wouldn't it be amazing during Mental Health Awareness Week to try and get a number of people together? And so Daniel Thompson, from the Project Officer for Malden District Community Voluntary Service and a project lead for our suicide prevention, is going to be joining us, and I'll get him to introduce himself. And we also have Lynn Cullens, the Bishop of Barking, and she's also the Chair of Wellbeing Steering Group for the Diocese of Chelmsford. And of course, Janet herself is the Rural Advisor and Agriculture Chaplain for the Diocese of Chelmsford. So this is a bit of a joint event between the Diocese of Chelmsford and Kintsugi Hope, but I appreciate there are people here from all over the UK. So if you're not from Essex, we forgive you. It's okay. We know it's where God lives. But if you're not from Essex, it's fine, because we will be talking about rural issues across the UK. So Daniel Thompson, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Daniel, and what you do and why you're passionate about this?
Yeah, hello everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank you very much thank you all really for having me here today. It's a real privilege and honour to be here. And just a little bit about myself is I've joined Malden District Community Voluntary Service as a project officer, and that's from March 2022. So for the last year up to the end of March 2023, I was working on what's known as the Business Resilience Project. And in simple terms, that was a project, a community project. Just to give a little bit of context, the Community Voluntary Service does a lot of volunteer-led community benefit projects, ranging from supporting people who are maybe socially isolated or need some form of support in some way. And my project was a bit of a slight departure really in a way from that, in the fact that it was really working with the actual business sector of the Malden District and working with employee resilience and well-being. So the concept that underpinned it was very much one of, if we can support people, the employees who work for local businesses, then in equal measure, you are actually supporting that business at the same time. Because if you're supporting workers who are going through difficult times with the current cost of living crisis and post-pandemic, you can boost people where they need it, which means employers can benefit from reduced loss of time from staff or stress-related issues. So it was a kind of two-pronged, double-layered sort of philosophy to the project, and that's what I was leading on, as I say, from March 2022 to the end of March this year. And then my work has now shifted into suicide prevention focused. There was an element of suicide prevention work in the Business Resilience Project, because some of the businesses within the Malden District are in the Dengie Peninsula, which is an agricultural area, farmland effectively, with lots of farmers. So there was an element of supporting those businesses. And one of the key topics that affects that community is, unfortunately, as sad as it is, suicide. And so the focus has now shifted. My role has shifted primarily on focus on suicide prevention, hence my involvement and work with Janet here. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Hopefully that gives a good context. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That's really, really helpful. And that leads us nicely on to Janet. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do, Janet, for people? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Nichols, and I'm the Rural Advisor and Agricultural Chaplain for the Diocese of Chelmsford, the Anglican Diocese of Chelmsford. So that includes all of Essex and a little bit of London. So Essex is about 70% rural. I just thought I would fly that flag for rural, really actually looking at the whole geographical span that we've got this evening. And I know some of you are from very deeply rural parts of the country. Essex has got some as well. So my role is to support rural communities, rural life, rural churches, and with the agricultural chaplaincy, it's a chaplaincy to the farming community. Therefore, I try to be that presence wherever farmers gather, go to all sorts of meetings, agricultural shows, and on the radio a lot, just being that person representing the church amongst the agricultural community. I come from a farming background myself, an Essex farming background. So the joys and challenges of farming I know firsthand. And mental well-being within that just is at the top of my list. I see that the challenges that farmers and some people in rural communities face with their mental health. And just being there to support them is such an incredible privilege and a really important part of my role, which hopefully there'll be some opportunity to just expand on later this evening.
Thank you so much, Janet. That's amazing. And I know you do an incredible job, and which we're very grateful for. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Anglican setup, the Diocese of Chelmsford, I think, is one of the largest dioceses, isn't it? Am I right in thinking that? It's a very big diocese. It covers a lot, a massive area. So it's incredible. And I'm just going to introduce Bishop Lynn and tell us a little bit about your passion for this and why you're involved.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as you said, I'm Bishop of Barking in Chelmsford Diocese. You're right, Chelmsford Diocese is huge. It's over 3 million people. It's the second biggest diocese in the country. And we've got rural, urban and coastal context. So we kind of cover it all, really. I'm also chair of the Chelmsford Diocesan Steering Group on Wellbeing. As a diocese, we've committed to the Church of England Covenant for Clergy Wellbeing that was agreed by General Synod in 2019, and we've been rolling out a programme of wellbeing related support and activity which has been actively underway since last year. So just recently we had a seminar which we called From Surviving to Thriving, and that was for church leaders, both ordained and lay. Over 60 church leaders signed up and came along. Really seemed to find that helpful, not just the resources and the ideas that were given, but also networking with each other. You know, peer-to-peer support is really important, isn't it? And can be a really valuable source of support. As Bishop, I also undertake clergy MDRs, ministerial development reviews, and the first item on those is always, how are you feeling? And on quite a lot of them, in urban and rural contexts, it's I am feeling stressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm finding that I'm exhausted and finding it difficult to cope. So clearly well-being is something that we can't be complacent about, and I'm really pleased that as a diocese we've got it as a key part of our diocesan agenda, as Janet said. On a secular level, prior to ordination, I worked as Deputy Chief Exec for an older people's mental health charity. And I also lived on a small holding in a small rural community for several years. So that was really interesting because I'm kind of deeply urban. So to be put in a rural context like that was really, really interesting. And I served as a self-supporting minister in a rural church too, which again was really interesting. So I have got a heart for some of this stuff that we're going to be talking about this evening. So I hope I might bring something of those experiences, professional, ministerial, and personal, into the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you so much. And so we've got a really amazing opportunity to ask these guys questions. And I know some of you are also from the Kintsugi Hope Network. For those of you who don't know, Kintsugi works with 400 different churches across the United Kingdom, from 27 different denominations. So working right across the spectrum. And we have 1,500 leaders. And I know there's quite a few of you on this call because I can see your names. I know who you are. And you are very welcome. And running wellbeing groups. And I'll explain a little bit about that later. But it's everywhere from Inverness, and I saw Scotland there on the chat as well, to Wales, to all over. And actually, a lot of people came up to me as we were launching Kintsugi Hope 5 years and just saying how desperately it's needed in rural communities. And we've been talking about running Kintsugi groups in farmers markets and in local pubs, and working out the best way to do it and the best people to work with. And this is part of our learning experience. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you a very short video clip that starts to unpack some of the issues for rural communities in terms of well-being. But this really is your opportunity to put the questions in the chat. I've intentionally put this video in because sometimes I feel like we can get on these calls and it can just feel very overwhelming very quickly. And so here's a couple of minutes to pause and to watch this video and maybe think about what's the one thing that you'd really like to ask or would really appreciate some insight into. So can I encourage each of you, if you can, to try and put something in the chat, and we'll do the best that we can to get through it. So yeah, we'll watch this and then we'll have the question.
With levels of depression in the farming industry increasing and suicide rates in agricultural workers among the highest in any occupational group, mental health provider Tees Escond Weir Valley's NHS Foundation Trust are encouraging people living or working in rural communities to look out for signs of mental ill health in themselves and others.
Farmers are very isolated where they work, and so the pressure that builds up with their everyday living starts to become overwhelming.
So people we've identified being most at risk in the rural communities are those who are married, are in their 40s, 50s and 60s, who live or work within the agricultural sector. Another risk group are those who are older and more affluent individuals who live in and around commuter villages.
Mood, never happy, getting angry at the smallest things, whether it's a water pipe that's gone or just a sheep running the wrong way, and it just lost it for me. Didn't want to do anything, didn't want to go out on family days if that was very rare anyway. Just generally just unhappy.
So common things that we look out for include changes in behaviour. So sometimes people can become more withdrawn, sometimes they can become a bit more grumpy, maybe a bit more irritable, and sometimes people become over-involved in the workplace. If you notice that people are drinking a little bit more than usual, maybe getting into arguments more frequently, maybe having physical symptoms such as disrupted sleep or changes in their appetite, then those are warning signs.
My first bit of encouragement really would be to say that if you're starting to experience any kind of difficulties that you're concerned about, would be to talk to somebody. And normally that might include family or friends or somebody that you trust that you can have a confidential conversation with.
Well, I'm at college at the moment and there seems to be quite a lot of help there, as in if you talk to your tutors, they'd help talk to you or probably guide you. And there's also a student services part of college which has a lot of help there as well.
On a day-to-day basis, it's about recognising that your brain needs some downtime. Time off your own farm to do something else is really, really beneficial.
Can do. make space to connect with others, make space to talk. Make sure that you go out, make sure that you meet people when all in you makes you feel, I want to stay in.
Is to think about going and having a conversation with your GP. The GP will have a little bit more time to talk through some of the concerns that you've got, and they'll be very knowledgeable about the range and the variety of help and support that's available for you. Some of the interventions that are available are done in a wide variety of different ways, ranging from online, computerized packages, right through to attending courses, or sitting in the more traditional face-to-face, one-to-one therapies.
Stick by them because it is hard. It's not easy, and it is very demanding on the partner as well as both partners really. Call the doctors yourself, ask them to give them a call. Just be a friend as well as their partner. Go with them to anything they want you to do. I spoke to my partner a lot and tried to help him out as much as I can to let him that I'm there, and just kept an eye, because that is the main thing to do really.
Great, really, really helpful. Thank you everyone who's been writing in the chat. Please continue to write your questions. Some really helpful insights there, and I'll pick up on some of those things shortly. But thank you so much. Please continue to use the chat facility, and also if you spot someone from the similar area to you, then it's a great opportunity to direct message them and to build a relationship as well, and maybe offer some support. So I'm going to kick us off with the first question, which is looking at really what is the most unique challenges that people face in rural communities in connection to their well-being and their mental and emotional health. Who wants to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I can do that if you like. I think probably unique to rural communities is that quite a few people live geographically quite isolated. And isolation in itself is not necessarily an issue until you become lonely within that isolation. So people can be living in an isolated farmstead or house, small hamlet, and feel quite okay about it if they've got good connections with people, with friends, with family, with internet. I can say one of my anxieties about tonight being in a rural community was whether my internet was going to hold out. And that is a very real issue for people in some rural areas of our country. So that isolation, loneliness, sometimes lack of amenities, lack of, just bus services to get somewhere. We heard the young woman speaking on that video saying, getting away from the farm for a day. If you're trying to get away from your bungalow for a day as an older person and there aren't any buses, that those things can be more difficult. So lack of community communications, lack of amenities, public transport, all those things can actually just bring some unique challenges that impact on mental well-being.
Fantastic. Thank you, Janet, for that. Dan, from your experience, what are some of the things that you feel that are some of the unique challenges? I think you're on mute.
My apologies. That's because I was coughing a moment ago.
Okay.
So from where I come from, Patrick, very much in trying to work with the rural community, when I always try to frame it in this way, and I hope this is helpful, is when we talk about resilience and we talk about being resilient to things like these experiences, the sort of experiences that Janet was saying, just like Janet was outlining, you can be isolated but be connected. And so if we define what that is, a connection, from where I come from, it's always these human needs. Yes, we need food, we need water, we need our electricity, we need our warmth, but to truly be happy and contented, we need a deeper layer than that. We need a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of feeling, you know, connected to other humans and other people. And so isolation can act as like an amplifier in a way to human experiences that people experience. So for instance, if somebody did feel a loss in some way, a bereavement, if you've got no one to talk to, that experience then becomes overwhelming, truly overwhelming. And so the isolation is truly key to being able to give people resilience. And so it's really about creating a fertile ground. Sorry, that was an unintentional farming pun there, but create a fertile ground for people to actually have a fighting chance to be resilient. And I think it's just, that's what underpins a lot of what we're trying to do, and upskilling people with skills to be able to identify the loved ones around them that are, you know, as Janet was saying, and just the video was saying about observing those changes in people. That's a key indicator. But then knowing what to do and how to do it, that's a really important thing. But even there, the story doesn't stop. You could give people all of that, but if you've got all the upskilling and the formal training in place, but you haven't got connection and you haven't got sense of belonging, then it can really undermine anything you try to do. So it's very much about forming that sense of community, that sense of connection, alongside formal training, upskilling, you know. So it's like a whole package as such, you know.
Yeah, and I think I'll come to Bishop Lynn now, but I'd like to ask you all, really, how do you create that sense of belonging when people are so isolated? Because I think isolation always escalates, and well, loneliness particularly always escalates any mental health issue, doesn't it? I mean, I work with a lot of GPs in the NHS, and they're saying to me that actually they see so many lonely people each day, and who are alone with their thoughts and don't have that connection or that sense of belonging. So how do we create that in rural communities is the obvious question. But Bishop Lynn, let me come to you around some of your insights into what you feel are some of the unique challenges that our rural communities are facing.
I mean, what strikes me when I drive around and I visit our rural churches is often they're kind of the last man standing in those communities. So there's well, a kind of unique pressure on the rural church, but also a unique opportunity, really. We've moved on from one church, one vicar. So often we can have a member of clergy covering 3, 4, or even more churches. So there's a pressure there in the geographic spread of the ministry that we have, but also in terms of the demands on the rural church, really. I think what I would really urge the rural church is to see what an opportunity that is, really, because I think people do desire community. I think lockdown showed us that we desire community, we desire to be with other people. And I think the rural church is ideally placed to be that that focus of the community. And unique challenges. We're spread thin and the expectations are high, but the rural church in many places is thriving as a result of that, and is a real hub for the community, really.
Yeah, and I guess that another thing that I've always felt about this is sometimes perception and reality are very different things, and I think that I'm always challenged by those verses in 1 Chronicles 12. It says the men of Issachar understood the times and knew what Israel should do. And I know, Janet, that when we were speaking, we were saying that actually poverty is a huge issue in rural communities, but sometimes you drive past a big house and you assume, oh, they must be fine, but actually everyone's in the kitchen because that's the only room you can heat.
Yeah, it can be very hidden. I think the term I used when we were chatting, Patrick, is, you know, there's often a saga behind the Aga. That actually, you know, there are stories that are very hidden, and sometimes, you know, the perception of poverty in rural communities can be quite different to what, you know, the statisticians might think of, you know, as the norm. And sometimes it'll be our schools that will pick up those signs of poverty, and of course our churches. as well as NHS services and so on. So it is those connections that make quite a difference to pick up those situations where there is poverty. And often I noticed some of the questions coming into the chat were sort of related about this to this really. There's often a real element of dignity about the way that we support people in that. If you imagine that your whole life's work is producing food for people on a farm, and actually you haven't got enough to feed yourself well, you know, that really hits deep, and the hurt is very significant. You know, going to a food bank is never going to be a choice that is going to be made. You know, the support needs to be very subtle in those situations to maintain respect and dignity.
Yeah, and I think, isn't it right that a lot of these farms have been in the family for generations, and so there's that whole history of the farm as well, which you're sort of fighting against, aren't you?
Yeah, that can be a huge responsibility, feeling that the land that you are farming, you know, has been in your family for generations and generations. And we all know that the situation with agriculture nationally at the moment is changing hugely and significantly and very quickly. And the question of viability is becoming very prominent in places that hadn't expected it to be. Therefore, there are a lot of farming families, particularly in traditional agricultural contexts, that are facing this viability question and the issue of, I think it's going to be lost on my watch. And that is a huge responsibility to be holding. And those of us that are in those pastoral support situations with an insight into it are very aware of those challenges. And I think maybe we'll move on to some of the direct sort of causes that have been identified of that very high suicide rate within the farming community. And that is one of the factors that contribute to that, the anxiety about the future.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, that's something we hear quite a lot about really around is the suicide rate within the farmers community. And I know that's definitely, and the impact that then has on other farmers and the whole community wider afield actually is huge, isn't it? I think a lot of people with anyone that dies by suicide, the ripple effect is incredible. And but tell us those unique challenges, particularly for farmers, and what you're seeing through your role.
Yeah, it's very much linked in with almost like there's a culture within that agriculture, like the farming community of as Janet was hitting on, pride and fear around losing something that is so precious and so valuable. That's certainly things, but also very much perhaps people haven't been raised with a familiarity of being open and honest about what's going on with them. And so sometimes people that are so close to someone who are suffering, they may not even be aware of it because somebody hasn't felt they've felt free enough to open and say about it. And so sometimes depression and feelings of helplessness or fear of the future or uncertainty can kind of hide in plain sight. You know, like it can be there, but it can just be undetected. You know, so yeah, that's very much at the forefront of my mind when we talk about this, and that does very much link into the point that Janet was talking about, pride and stuff. And of course, I don't say that from a judgmental point of view, you know, just a truthful point of view, you know, that is a definite thing that can happen. And so I think it's really about creating an opportunity where people feel safe enough to start talking about it, you know, opening up and starting the conversation. It's the beginning. It's the first step along that journey, you know, and that's what we're trying to support people like Janet in the farming community with, and everyone, you know, that's what we're trying to do with the CVS, is just do that. So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
That's great. And I guess something that you've all touched on already, and it's a huge question, because we've been talking about isolation, we're talking about some of the unique challenges that particularly farmers have. And we've mentioned the word dignity, we've mentioned the word safe. Dan, you were talking about people feeling safe. But I guess the theme is this: how do we create connection? How do we create a sense of belonging? And obviously this is a key role for the church. I feel like, being in every community across the country, and it has an amazing opportunity. I once said to a famous politician, which I don't want to mention his name, but he has blonde hair and he doesn't comb it very often, and I said, you know what, the church is in every community across this country, and incredible, and we'll probably outlast politicians, we'll outlast the 5 years, and we're very passionate about our communities. But you can see that some of the challenges that happen. So I guess the big question is, with the current climate, with the current challenges, is how do we create that sense of belonging, that sense of connection? I don't know who wants to take this one first. It's a bit of a huge one. Bishop Lynn.
Can I just say on that, what I've been struck by a couple of times is that rural churches have put on meals for those who are isolated or for those who might be lonely. They don't get anybody sign up for the meal, but they get loads of people who sign up to volunteer to help with the meal. And that again is that dignity issue, isn't it? That people want to go along, they want to have that community, they want to interact with other people, but we have to be very careful around how we make an offer around that, to protect people's dignity and to enable people to engage with that and access that. So yeah, I mean, but there's so many examples. Somebody put in the chat, what are some good examples of community building that's going on? So many rural churches that I visited, and I'm sure Janet would echo this, across our diocese, they have drop-ins during the week, they do afternoon teas, they do kind of community cafes, they've got craft groups where you can just drop in, all those things where you just create a safe, welcoming, open space, non-judgmental, that people can access free of charge if possible, are just spaces that are that have the potential to provide support, community cohesion, connection, and reduce isolation. So I don't think it's rocket science. Again, somebody else put that in the chat. I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's simple human connection and allowing and creating space for that to happen, really.
Thank you.
May I extend on that, please?
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Is that all right? Okay, I totally agree with that, completely agree with that. I just think, and this isn't a retort in any way, just an addition to, I think it can be really helpful when we think about it from a removing barriers point of view. If you can start from a point of view of, knowing your community, and that's where the church and all of the dioceses and all the people involved in it have such an intimate knowledge of the local people in the local area, that you can effectively gap analyze. You can gap analyze where there are transport issues for someone, or there are accessibility issues for whatever reason. And I think if you come from that angle and you almost like systematically kind of look at it, inspect it, and work out where there are barriers for people, that gives you again a fighting chance to go, okay, there's the data, we know this person has got an access issue for this reason, and then you can try to see if there's an asset available that you can bring to the table to deal with that. And if you haven't, you've effectively identified a gap that you can look to try and plug. And I think that's kind of like that's where we've tried to take that sort of model of approach in things. I think that can be a good way to be a launch platform to exactly what Lynn was saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think could I also come in there, just consolidating on all of that, really, that some of those situations where the church is host and these gatherings happen, and Dan and I have worked together on a couple that have just been incredibly well attended from farmers, and and they've had great fun, and the only challenge we've had is actually trying to get them to go home, because they've just so enjoyed being there. But it's actually using those gatherings to develop the connections as well. Having some resources there subtly, and inviting to such gatherings people representing different organisations in a very subtle way, so that the connections continue after that specific gathering, that we have really used those gatherings effectively. I'm also chaplain for a farming organisation called Farming Community Network, which I'm sure will be familiar to many people who've joined this online forum tonight. And the Farming Community Network, FCN, has a helpline, 03000 111 999, just leaving those cards everywhere, so that 365 day of the year helpline can be accessed. And from that, we know the calls will go to the right person to provide support. It's just a very easy take home. But we've extended the connections to our machinery suppliers, that they have the stickers now to put in their tractors and so on, just extending those connections out in a very sort of easy, subtle way.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. I think, can I just say, the chat is amazing. Just for you guys that are putting things in the chat is absolutely incredible. Some of the insight, some of the questions that you're asking, and how you're answering each other's questions as well. I really like that. That is really, really helpful as you start to discuss these different issues. And so I'd really encourage you to look in the chat, because people are sharing some really helpful things around how things are developing in their community, and what they found worked and what they found hasn't worked, and some of the challenges as well. There's a challenge here about moving into a rural village, finding it difficult to be accepted into the church and the village. There is different stuff here around how do we develop community work parties, inviting people. We have invited people into community work parties, inviting people into the churchyard. And this has developed over the last 2 years in the creation of the Olive Garden, with craft groups and creating glass mosaics. It's just wonderful. So please keep sharing your ideas. That's really, really good. I wanted to ask a little bit around social prescribing. That's been mentioned in the chat a few times. And it feels like in most communities, there will be churches, there'll be schools, there'll be doctors' surgeries. And I guess there's just some, how do we join the dots? I know one of the things in Kintsugi we're very keen on is working with the NHS on social prescribing. But have you guys seen good practice? Have we seen things that we can talk about that have worked? And if not, what are the barriers and how can we help remove them? Who would like to take that one?
That's a Dan, I would think.
I was just being patient with you guys. I do have something I can add in. Absolutely fine. So in the Morden district, in the recent times, since, as I said, since we've really started my role, we've really started to focus on suicide prevention. We have re-established, and it was something that was in place and just sort of dissolved slightly, just for various reasons. But it's effectively a suicide prevention group made up of members of different partner organisations, ranging from Essex County and Fire Services all the way through to farming community specific charities like YANA, which stands for You Are Not Alone, all the way through to specific men's health charities, one known as Reach Out for Mental Health, as well as members from the church community are part of it. And what we've done really is bring these people together, all of us together, with no hierarchy, everyone on equal terms, and really just to pool our resources and our knowledge to strategize and work out what assets and resources are available, with the aim of then, and really made me think when Janet was talking a little while ago, when she was saying about the stickers going into vehicles and farming equipment, as well as the the other information that's being spread. It's very much like an awareness campaign. Really what you're trying to do is you're trying to make as many people that are affected by these issues aware of the resources and the services available. And the best way to do that is by coming together, you are able to work out what areas geographically you can work in, what services you can signpost someone to within that group. If, say, I encountered someone with a particular problem, I would know, oh, I know a best organisation, they specialise in that. So you're able to understand what's available and work together in a way to get the maximum reach so that you can, like I say, in an awareness campaign sort of point of view, raise awareness. And the more awareness you've got and the more access in terms of ease of being able to signpost someone to a service, the more effective those services are going to be. So you're kind of really reinforcing each other in this very collaborative way with the aim of getting as far reach as possible and with the idea of it being very specifically and cleverly tailored so you know what service to signpost someone to. And I think that links in with the social prescription element, because that's effectively what a social prescriber would do if they were working with a doctor's surgery, except we're doing it from all of these many organizations that already exist. It's the same sort of model, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's where I think that is a good model for any area. So anyone who's listening from, I mean, I saw in the chat Isle of Wight there, you know, Hornchurch, Devon, you know, effectively, if you can put those feelers out and understand who the other member organizations are around you, you can form these collaborative processes that can be really good platforms and vehicles for delivering, you know. That's kind of what I would encourage anyone to do, because it's been positive so far. In the last few months we've done it in our area, it's been incredibly positive.
Yeah.
And it's going to just continue to be positive and continue to grow.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would recommend and encourage, really, you know.
Yeah. Fantastic. There is quite a few interesting questions here around rural churches being very small and very small in numbers. And is there anything that churches can do to help resource each other? I mean, Bishop Lynn, I don't know if you got any insight into this.
I mean, more and more across our diocese, and I suspect this is true nationally, we're encouraging churches to work at deanery level, so to work at a broader level, to strategize at that level, to seek to resource each other. You know, you don't need everybody to be providing something for older people. Just one church can have a specialism and deliver on that basis. So yeah, we do need to work together. I think there's something. I had a friend who was a member of clergy, and he was frustrated that people didn't come to his church. So he got a for sale board from an estate agent and stuck it in the garden of his church. And instantly he got hundreds of phone calls saying, how dare you sell that church that I never come to? And I think there's something in that, really, is that the church is often key to that community. Everybody in that rural community would say the church is important, even if they don't go. So how do we engage people in church? Somebody again in the chat said, you know, how do we take faith out of the picture? Because church might be important in terms of it being a neutral space and a venue to meet, but you may not have a faith, or you may be of a different faith. And I think that's part of the, again, a challenge and an opportunity, is how do we create neutral, safe space for people within a church without feeling that they're necessarily going to be evangelized into the congregation. And so I think it's important for churches, A, to see themselves as worship centres, because obviously we are called to make disciples, but also to recognise that we have an important role as a focus for community, regardless of faith or those considerations, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, time is absolutely flying past. I can't believe how quickly this conversation is going. But again, another key theme that seems to be coming through the chat again is people that have moved into rural communities, and even after 5 years, many years, are still struggling and almost being treated like an outsider. And what do we say, Janet, into a situation like that?
Well, I think I have to say that the church can be key in that. to actually be a very welcoming community, to look out for those that are new. The village that I live in, we have a system of welcome packs for new people moving in. So that, you know, they get a little pack with the village magazine, with, you know, various sort of welcome bits within it. It's always very easy when you're a long-term rural resident to think you are being very welcoming. And I think the responsibility is on those of us that are long-term residents of rural communities to listen well. And to encourage our friends, our neighbours, our fellow people in churches to listen well and effectively, to give people who are new an honest space to be able to say what it's like. I used to run a toddlers group in my village well before I was ordained. I thought we were the most welcoming group until someone came, and then when we phoned them up because they hadn't come again, said, actually, I just couldn't face it. It was so unwelcoming. And we needed to hear the reality. So so I don't know if any of those insights help, but just listen well, try to be non-judgmental and welcoming.
Yeah, I think non-judgmental is an absolutely key word within that. Dan, there's quite a lot of talk around men trying to reach men. And I know this is an issue in rural communities. I think it's an issue in lots of communities if we look at the stats around men's mental health. And it's incredible. I seem to get asked to speak at lots of men's breakfasts at the moment because they're like they're wanting to engage with this issue more, which is encouraging. But is there anything you can say into that for us?
Yeah, it's a powerful one. That it's a sad truth that men and being open don't always go hand in hand. You know, there are many barriers for men. I think without being too pigeonholey or judgmental, there is a shift happening, and I think younger generations are more open than perhaps previous generations. You know, and I think that's with all things in life. There are changes from one generation to another, but yeah, I think kind of along the lines of kind of what Janet was saying, really, when Janet was talking, it was very much that idea of creating that space to be able to be heard. And I think language comes into it, and the environment you create for someone. Different languages work with different people. I mean, it is a difficult topic. That that's actually a topic that a lot of people who try to deal with resilience on an emotional well-being level, let alone the suicide angle, which I've kind of accidentally touched on a bit too much, but it is a difficult thing to touch on. I think it's just about trying to understand, again, that removing barriers sort of angle. If you can create a space where a man can be open and tell you what's going on, then you've got a fighting chance to use that as a segue to get into identifying. Effectively, you're trying to remove the barrier, peel away the barriers, and there is no real easy answer to that. I'm sitting here and I haven't got an easy answer for that. I'm just going to be transparent, but I think the route to it is just creating a space where somebody feels like they can be open. And I think that's very much a human to human, individual to thing, and it's also to do with communities run in different ways, and goes back to like having an intimate knowledge of your community. It's really about just drawing on as much knowledge and wisdom as you can to remove and peel away those barriers. And that, I know I'm talking in broad terms, but you have to talk in broad terms because you can't be too specific, because it's different for each situation, I feel.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, one size never fits all.
Yeah.
I think as well, just speaking into the men thing, you know, we talk a lot about resilience within mental well-being, and I think within the farming community, I try to draw a real distinction between resilience and being macho.
Yeah.
You know, that they are very different. Within FCN, we have a poster that I love that has got really quite a dirty welly just in the poster, covered in farm muck, and it says "tough as old boots?" ? And I also always try to sort of say that resilience is a bit more like being comfortable in a worn out slipper than having to be as tough as an old boot.
Yeah, stigma, really, really around the topic of stigma, isn't it? Is really about that, trying to remove the any stigma barriers, and that language is a big part of that, and openness and creating the right environment. So yeah, I echo what Janet's saying there very much.
And I think something that you've all been saying is it all boils down to a relationship. Relationship nurtures the belief that change is possible. And that is key. How do we build relationship? How do we build sustainable relationships within our communities? Our time is coming to an end, so I want to give each of you a chance, really, just to give us your final thoughts on this evening and things that have been discussed. And then I'm just going to draw some of those thoughts together and then try and get practical with a few ideas of what we can do to go forward. So Bishop Lynn, let me come to you. What's been your observations and thoughts that you might want to leave us with?
There's a few things really in terms of engaging blokes. I've always found in the stuff that we've done in parishes that women engage verbally, so women are quite happy to sit and chat, but men need some kind of diversionary activity usually to enable them to engage, like, and relax, really. I think as well that we can think everybody wants to be part of a community and mix with other people. And my experience of living in a rural community is some of the farmers, some of the blokes didn't want to be in relationship with others, but they did need something to divert them from their farming activities. So we lived next door to an old farmer. He built a Romany caravan on his land, and he used to just go and sit in it. It never went anywhere. But actually, that was how he supported his well-being. He lit the stove, he sat there. It was absolutely stunning, and that was enough for him. That did it for him. So I think it's about not pushing people who maybe are natural introverts into community settings, but just affirming them in whatever diversionary activity supports their well-being, really. And I think the role of the church in raising awareness, Mental Health Awareness Week is a classic example of a time that we could have specific services, we could use specific liturgies, we could talk about Elijah. I love the piece in Elijah 1 Kings where he just lies down and he wants to die, and God says, no, all you need to do is eat, rest, and have something to drink and you'll be fine, and he was. Sometimes it's not rocket science, sometimes it's just the basics, really. So I do think mental health training for some of our congregations in our rural communities would be really helpful too, because I think there's a very low level of awareness, really.
Yeah. Fantastic. Janet, any thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah, my final thought is I think there's so much that is hopeful. I'm really encouraged by the younger generations that I had the privilege of being part of Essex Young Farmers. They talk about these things far more readily than their parents' generation did. So I think that is really hopeful. And I think the mental well-being message is getting out in our rural communities in a much more effective way. The National Farmers Union, they always have a pre-harvest health and safety day. And within that health and safety day, there are now 3 presentations on mental well-being, that we wouldn't have heard of that a decade ago. So I think that there's so much hope, and I just feel real pride in what the rural church can do with sometimes tiny resources to be able to offer hospitality, warmth, connection, and welcome.
Yeah, I love that. Hospitality, warmth, and welcome. Dan, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like a springboard off of what Lynn and Janet have said, in the fact that I think you mentioned a minute about how to be practical about it, and I just kind of I would say that what the message I've been trying to put across is just creating that that space for a conversation to start. And I think if you can do, if anyone's listening to this and they're really looking to try and bring positivity and boost well-being and mental health in their community, if you can create spaces to begin with that give an opportunity. I would say that the opening thing is creating this bit like what Lynn was saying about the distraction. You know, it doesn't have to be, if you can create a space that isn't overtly saying this is about boosting your mental health, or this is about, you know, addressing particular issues, and just have a social space, a space with no agenda, perhaps, or a space that hasn't got any message being pushed in it, but people can just feel free and open, and then have resources or information available. You can kind of get a lot in that. You can create a space where people feel comfortable. You can upskill people and raise awareness by subtly bringing information to it. And you can cultivate a place where people feel free and open that will talk. And as soon as you've done that, that's your segue into much more. Then you can signpost to someone to some more formal mental health training. And then they can be upskilled more to see the people around them, changes in them. Or it might be you upskill someone to become aware of you know, services that are available for bereavement or for, you know, any particular issue. And I think it starts with that, creating a place where a conversation can happen. I think it starts with that. You know,
thank you so much, and Dan, for all your insights, and for Janet, and for Bishop Lynn as well. I just want to finish by saying that one of the things that we're really passionate about actually is creating safe and supportive spaces. And some of you may have heard of the word kintsugi. Kintsugi is a Japanese word that means golden joinery. So if we get a bowl and we break it, we tend to mend it with super glue, and that means we hide the cracks, we pretend it's not broken. But what they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue, so instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. So arguably the object becomes more beautiful for being broken. It certainly becomes more unique. And so 5 years ago, me and my wife, we founded a charity called Kintsugi Hope to support people in their well-being, to create safe and supportive spaces. And very, very simple. I think some of the best ideas are the simplest ideas. Is what Kintsugi Hope does is it trains churches and charities across the UK to run supportive spaces, just like we've been talking about, in their community. And so we devised a 12-week program. And some people run it for 6, most people run it for 12, loosely based on Alcoholics Anonymous. And it really wasn't for those within the church, it was for those in the community. And what we decided to do is to see if we could train people. We train people online. They go through a training process, and we check safeguarding policies and references and all that. But churches apply to do it. And once they apply to do it, they can run it in their community. Some people run it on Zoom. Some people run it in pubs. It runs in schools, in universities. We're looking at farmers markets as a potential place to run it. And the stories are just overwhelming. People have said, literally, this Kintsugi group has saved my life. We've had young people do it in schools. It's just been incredible. You know, there's been huge issues with our young people around self-harm. And just creating a safe space where people don't feel judged. And I think all our panelists have been talking about non-judgmental. So how do we create those safe spaces? And I guess Kintsugi Hope is just a tool to create safe spaces in your community. A map's coming up here just shows you where Kintsugi was working before COVID. And then COVID hit. And I must admit, me being someone who struggles a bit with my mental health occasionally, I catastrophized things quite quickly. And I was like, COVID's coming, that's it, we're going to shut the charity down. It's a complete and utter disaster. But actually, it was probably escalated the growth of Kintsugi Hope, because people started running Kintsugi groups on Zoom, and they started running it as support groups. And now this next slide will show you where Kintsugi is working today. And you can see it's gone all over in rural communities in Wales, particularly. I've been up there and spoken in different churches, and Northern Ireland as well. There's some brilliant stuff going on. And we've just been so amazed. And so just very simply, if there's any way that Kintsugi Hope can help you, support you, and your church, then please get in touch with us. We run info sessions online where people can come and ask questions, and just to get involved. I have to be really clear, we're not the answer. We're a tiny jigsaw piece. And I think, there's other charities as well that do an amazing stuff and people. So we're very, very clear that we're just part of an answer. And we're very relational. We love working with people. We love working in partnership. And that's why we've been so chuffed to put this on with the Diocese of Chelmsford this evening. But all those dots, they're quite inspiring. It's quite nice to see growth. It's quite nice to see the church doing well. And I really like Janet's positivity there as well. I was saying she's so full of hope. And I think that's what the church needs to be. It needs to be a place of hope. And but for me, every single one, what makes those dots really exciting is everyone represents a church, a life, a person. And we're just going to finish by listening to a story, just like 2 minutes, please try and stay with it, of someone whose life has been really transformed and through being loved. On Saturday, we are at Chelmsford Cathedral for a conference called the Gentle Presence Conference. And Graham Kendrick's there, we've got psychologists there, Mick Fleming, very different context, very urban context in Burnley, just coming and talk about some of their stuff. But I love the phrase, the church needs to be a gentle presence. And this story just epitomizes what Kintsugi is all about. So this is my beautiful friend, Jean.
I was born and brought up in a shop, over a sweet shop and tobacconist, with a father who had mental health problems, who didn't really want to be a shopkeeper at all, and a mother who was very subservient. A twin brother who was incredibly clever. We were constantly compared, as you can imagine, but it never seemed to bother me that much. I really wasn't a competitive person anyway, so I was always very pleased for him when he achieved, but I think I gave up on myself. I ended up thinking, well, I don't know what love feels like. I know I am loved, but I don't think I know what that feels like, really. So that's been my quest, I think, in life, has been to try and find out that. I used to view myself as weak, sensitive, quite negatively, whereas now, since I've been on this Kintsugi journey, I see all those things as gifts. You can be compassionate when you're sensitive. You can have a lot of empathy when you've been through stuff yourself. I heard Patrick Reagan speak. He did the Honesty Over Silence tour, and afterwards he said, would I consider doing a pilot group for the Kintsugi Hope course? Didn't know what I was taking on at the time, and felt terribly insecure about the whole thing, because I just thought, what am I going to do? I don't know enough about these things. And then I realised you don't have to do very much, actually. The material was there in all different learning styles. All you had to do was turn up, be honest, say me too. I'm not an expert, I'm one of you. And I think that's hugely empowering for people. The greatest treasure is in finding Kintsugi and following a way of being. To accept who I am, warts and all. I'm not going to be perfect. I'll try, I'll do my best. But, and to show kindness and gentleness and love to people. That's what I found out what love is.
So that was my lovely friend Jean. She went to an Anglican church. Jean died recently of cancer, and she organised her Thanksgiving service and her funeral. I had the privilege of speaking at it. And Jean was always one of those characters who was always really, really down on herself and full of no confidence, thinking, I just can't make a difference. I can't do anything. And I don't know, in the last 3 or 4 years, just through doing the Kintsugi groups, I mean, she ran so many groups. She just realized that God used her brokenness, that God used her story, that that's what people wanted. People want something that's authentic and real. And her service was incredible. There were 300 people there, and everyone had a Jean story, afterwards, just chatting to people. And so I hope you find that inspiring, that there is hope, and sometimes our weaknesses are actually the thing that God uses the most. And so I'd really encourage you, if there's anything that any of us could do to help, we'd love to. I'd love to pray for you and then send you on your way. I'm sorry we're a couple of minutes finishing late. Can I encourage you a couple of things? Please write thank you to my guests in the chat. I think the really difficult thing with Zoom meetings is you don't get that interaction at the back of the church, do you, at the end? And so it can feel a little bit like you pour your heart out there and then you put the laptop down and you're off. So I always say to people at the end of Zoom, please say thank you in the chat, because they're giving up an hour of their times, and that they incredible people who do so much for our community. So please tell them what you thought of this evening. Please email us and let us know what you think the next steps should be. We will put this video on YouTube, and we will email you all with links to Kintsugi Hope, the info session, and also some of the other things that are going on. I know Dan's got lots of resources which also that he wanted to let you know about. So we'll make sure those links are in the email as well. So please check that out. Let me pray. Father God, I thank you for every person on this Zoom call and the people that will be listening later on YouTube. I thank you, Lord, for our discussion. I thank you, Lord, that you love people, and Lord, that this issue around mental health, well-being in rural communities, I pray you'd help us to learn what it is to be a gentle presence. Help us to build those relationships, Lord. We thank you for all the encouraging stories that have been in the chat, Lord, of people supporting one another, coming alongside one another. And God, I pray that this would only be the start and of more collaboration and more partnership working. Father, we know that you are so for people, and Lord, we want to be your church, your hands and your feet, your gentle presence in communities that we live in. Father, bless everyone that's listened to them. Bless their families at this time. Amen.